Hi, it's Terry Ryder from hotspotting.com.au. I want to talk a little bit more about the 60 Minutes fiasco, the appalling program that they ran on Sunday called Bricks and Slaughter. I made some comments about this last night, in which I recorded the fact that I was actually approached by 60 Minutes, one of their producers, to participate in that program. They told me that they were planning to do an item which would say that housing markets across Australia are about to crash. And I told them that I didn't agree with that preconceived headline that they concocted out of nowhere. They lost interest in speaking to me very quickly and terminated the phone call, and no interview took place. Because quite clearly they were only interested in talking to people who were willing to say what they wanted them to say, namely that property values were going to crash across Australia. And I certainly don't see that, and neither does anybody else who's sensible and informed and independent. It's also notable that in the last day or so that a couple of the people actually appeared on the program have come out in other media and claimed that their views were seriously misrepresented by selective editing, which is something that television can do pretty easily. Louis Christopher, for example, is a highly respected long-term researcher and writer on the residential property industry in Australia, based in Sydney. I know Louis and I respect his work and his views, and he says that 60 Minutes interviewed him for 45 minutes, but what they used from the interview was approximately 1 minute, and it was very, very selectively chosen. This is what he says in his statement today. I stated in my interview with 60 Minutes the risks as well as the safety valves that are still present in the property market, including strong local economies, strong population growth, banks very unlikely to fall, the Reserve Bank and the federal government likely intervening in the property market should the market deteriorate. The program covered my comments on the risks and overvaluation only, which distorted my views. And he goes on at some length to explain what he really thinks is likely to happen in the property market in Australia. And he says, overall, I think that a full-blown housing crash scenario playing out is extremely unlikely. So Martin North, who's an economist, said similar things, that he expressed a number of views, and they very, very selectively picked the quotes out of the interview that appeared to represent him saying that a massive crash was going to happen. And he says that he believes that's actually unlikely, and he's not happy with the way that they took his comments out of context and presented in a way that misrepresented his overall views. Louis Christopher from SQM Research saying pretty much the same thing. So it's pretty clear what they set out to do. It was a real hatchet job. They set out to do something sensationalist to improve their ratings, presumably, and they were only interested in talking to people who would say what they wanted them to say, and they very selectively edited those comments as well to misrepresent people's views. And in addition to that, a number of reputable independent commentators on the property industry have come out and said that they think that the findings, the views expressed on that 60 Minutes program were just completely over the top, and the scenarios they presented very, very unlikely to happen. Brendan Coates from the Grattan Institute, which is an independent think tank, says that a 40% fall in the next 12 months is not likely. AMP Capital Chief Economist Shane Oliver, who often comments on the real estate market, I think he can be accurately described as an independent observer of the market without any vested interest in talking it up or down. He says that the doomsaying that was present in that 60 Minutes items is all too familiar. And he says 40% seems to be a common number that pops up in these crash calls. And I know that to be true because, as I said in my comments last night, I've actually thoroughly researched this particular phenomenon. For a particular exercise I did a couple of years ago, going back to the turn of the century and scouring media for the major predictions that have been made about outcomes in the real estate market and comparing them with what actually happened. and found that these kinds of calls that property values are going to crash 40%, 50%, 60% are quite common, and they've all been wrong. And they've all been done by people who are simply trying to drum up free publicity in a sensationalist way to either promote a seminar tour or to someone who's got a book launch, for example. Harry S. Dent from the United States has been to Australia 3 times in the last 7 years. Each time has predicted Armageddon in our property markets in the next 12 months and been spectacularly wrong each time. So Shane Oliver, from the chief economist from AMP Capital, was referring to that when he said that, this 40% figure seems to be a common number that pops up when anybody wants to make a crash call in the Australian property market. Another independent commentator, Stephen Kakoulis, from he's the managing director of market economics, says there's a whole lot of reasons to suggest prices are going to be weaker for a shorter amount of time, but it's remarkably orderly. People aren't rushing in to hand over their keys. Shane Oliver comments further in this piece that I'm referring to that appeared in media today, saying there's a lot of talk about people in mortgage stress, but from what I've seen, mortgage stress is a lot lower than it was in 2011 when interest rates were much higher. And I've been watching this for at least 15 years. Yeah, I think there's way too much talk in media about mortgage stress. You see, what happens is somebody has arbitrarily established a benchmark. Anybody who's paying above this percentage of their income on their mortgage is deemed to be in mortgage stress. Well, I mean, who decides that? It's not a matter of fact. It's just an arbitrary benchmark that somebody has established for the purposes of publishing a report to get some free publicity. The independent research, I think, shows something quite different, that the vast majority of Australian households with mortgages are ahead on their repayments, and the typical situation, last time I saw research on this, was about 2 years ahead. Mortgage delinquencies in Australia are at remarkably low rates. They hover between about 1% and 1.5% of households with mortgages. This mortgage delinquency means people who are a month behind in their repayments. So 99% of households with mortgages, or close to it, are paying on time. And as I mentioned, most of them are actually ahead on their repayments, well ahead. And so I think the reality is a long way short of us having a mortgage-stressed nation. It's just something that people like to say to drum up publicity, and that's what it's all about. All of this is about publicity and ratings. People know that if they want free publicity to publicise themselves or their business or achieve some purpose, that the shortcut to achieving that free publicity is to say something sensationally negative about the housing market. 60 Minutes motivations were somewhat different. I think they're simply chasing ratings. There used to be a serious current affairs program a long time ago, back in the days of George Negus and Ray Martin, but those days are long gone. They're just tabloid media, the worst kind of tabloid media, and this program was just scurrilous, dishonest, I would suggest fraudulent. They try to achieve financial outcomes by being extremely dishonest, and hopefully people will ignore them. Certainly the independent observers that I've mentioned and others who research and comment on the residential property markets around Australia have just shrugged it off as just yet another piece of sensationalist media that's really meaningless, and we should all just forget about and get on with business. That's certainly what I intend to do. Okay, that's it on that subject for now. I will be back in a little while, just over an hour from now, to do my weekly feature, which is Hotspot of the Week. And yes, quite contrary to the scenario painted by 60 Minutes, there are plenty of strong and rising markets out there to talk about, and I'll be talking about another one of those when I'm back in at 7:30 Australian Eastern Time to talk about my Hotspot of the Week. So I'll see you then. Thanks. Bye.